Australia Post acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we operate, live and gather as employees, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. By performing the Acknowledgement to Country, we are all embracing and respecting the cultures and values of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It's a sign of reconciliation and recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the original custodians. Importantly, it promotes awareness of the histories and cultures of our First Nations people and the cultural connection to country, which is inherent to identity and means more than just a place. The cultural connection to country represents family, kin, law, ceremony, traditions, spiritual, physical, social, language and emotional well-being. It's a continuing living culture that always was and always will be.
There are 10 humans living in space, and a nuclear-powered robot is currently searching for life on Mars.
And halfway between the Earth and the Sun, 18 gold-plated beryllium hexagons have unfurled to gaze into the deepest places in the cosmos. Back here on the planet we call home, battery-powered electric robots are mapping the Antarctic seabed in high definition. We've got drones flying through gigafactories in Berlin, and 14-ton driverless tractors are autonomously plowing the fields in the American Midwest.
2 months ago, scientists unveiled a new mRNA vaccine for solid cancer tumours. And earlier this year, in a first of its kind, a completely paralysed, locked-in person was able to communicate using entire sentences with a machine connected to their mind.
Hi, my name is Tane Hunter. I'm a cancer researcher, bioinformatician, and data scientist. I use artificial intelligence, machine learning, to scan through the code of life, DNA, and figure out what particular changes are causing cancer and help clinicians find the right treatments to improve patient outcome.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Maclad. I am a director of Future Crunch, an entrepreneur, a proud mum, and I have an obsession with unlocking the extraordinary feats of humankind as the host of the DNA of Purpose podcast. And together we are Future Crunch. So what is Future Crunch? A high-tech breakfast cereal?
For robots? No, it's actually a think tank based here in Melbourne, which has a simple mission: to discover what's happening on the frontiers of science and technology, and to seek out and tell stories of human progress, which I think we all need a little bit more of today.
We help organisations to understand what's coming next by providing them with the tools that they need to thrive as we move into a new era.
So we're going to kick off today by talking to you about what we think is the most important skill in the workplace today, a skill that Harvard Business Review calls the new competitive advantage. It's called AQ, the Adaptability Quotient. It's your ability to identify what is relevant, unlearn obsolete knowledge, and make a conscious effort to change in real time.
Today, we are going to share with you examples of this skill in diverse organisations and within diverse individuals. And then we're going to share with you strategies to help you to cultivate and exercise this mindset, But first, we're going to tell you why now is such a crucial time to be adaptable. A time where it feels like we are characters in a movie with a really unpredictable script.
I don't know about you, but the pandemic felt like stumbling through an entire zombie film. Now, on day 213, I learned to bake sourdough bread. I hope there's some sourdough bread aficionados out there.
No, not I.
No, you're a terrible cook. But it was also complete with angry mobs and, unfortunately, the daily body counts.
Fortunately, though, we were saved by a team of medical avengers with a miracle vaccine just in the nick of time. Now, almost 3/4 of humanity have now received the antidote in the largest, quickest, and most successful public health campaign of all time.
Yet this universe works in mysterious ways. The war in the Ukraine might have done more to accelerate the clean energy revolution than any other event to date. Because countries now know that war may stop the flow of oil, but doesn't stop the sun from shining and the wind from blowing. And it's getting fast and furious out there. Currently, there are over 25 million electric vehicles on the road worldwide. Now, my parents, over 70, just bought their first electric vehicle, so if they can do it, so can you. You can even buy an electric battery-powered ute that is faster than any production Ferrari ever made.
Restaurants in Singapore and Tel Aviv are now serving up 3D printed lab-grown meat.
So this is a 3D printed lab-grown Wagyu steak, and when given to consumers, it is indistinguishable from the real thing. I can report now that cows everywhere are utterly over the moon.
People are now also growing fruit in underwater farms off the coast of Italy. And a cafe in Japan is now entirely staffed by avatars, robots that are controlled remotely via the internet by people unable to leave their homes due to such things as social anxiety, childcare, and disability. Now, these robots can even be controlled by eye movement alone, which means even if a person is immobilized, they now have the opportunity to work in a cafe.
Meanwhile, the president of El Salvador is planning to create a Bitcoin city on the base of a volcano, powered by its geothermal energy. I know what you're thinking, right? A place with zero taxes?
Yeah, that sounds pretty good.
Funded by magical internet money?
Yep, still like it.
Even though it hasn't been doing so well in the last couple of months. Constructed on a tectonic fault line.
Oh, that one's a little bit shaky.
And ruled by, obviously, the next Bond villain. I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
We've gone from looking at silver screens for entertainment to today peering at each other in little boxes for everything all of the time. Now, if this was a movie, it would be a tragic comedy because even the CEO of Zoom has Zoom fatigue. So if you're feeling a little bit fatigued right now, that is okay. You have every right to feel dusty, drowsy, bamboozled, and baffled. Because just like Jurassic Park, we've managed to escape the T-Rex, we've climbed over the electrical fence, but there's no helicopter coming to take you back to the real world because this is the real world.
All right, so why are things so crazy? How do we keep up with the accelerating pace of change? Well, before we get too far down that rabbit hole, let's give you a tool, a lens to help you understand the rapid pace of technological progress and help you understand why it makes people feel so uncomfortable. It turns out human beings think in a linear fashion. We have evolutionary hangovers, cognitive biases that leave us ill-equipped to deal with the rapid pace of change. When we try and predict the future, we tend to take changes that are happening around us and extrapolate them linearly into the future. The problem, however, is the world doesn't change in a linear fashion. It changes exponentially. So when we try and predict the future, we're left with a perception gap. It means in the short term, we overestimate technology and its impact, and in the long term, we greatly underestimate it. This is known as Amara's Law. It happens from everything from blockchain to robotics, from medicine to mobile phones.
Now, as scientists and science communicators, we find it delightfully ironic that what forced us to go remote over the last 2 years was not a new exponential technology like blockchain, 5G, or even the metaverse. It was biology, a tiny bundle of protein 10,000 times smaller than a grain of salt. Now, technically, we could have gone remote years ago, but we didn't because mammalian habits are hard to change. What we have all experienced over the last 24 months is essentially a convergence of two incredibly powerful forces: disruptive digital technologies and a global pandemic. This combination has caused unprecedented upheaval in pretty much every single industry at once. You name it, the financial sector, manufacturing, logistics.
My sector, healthcare, we've got media, energy, education. We've seen years of transformation crunched into a matter of months. So it's crazy out there, but it's also a great time of opportunity, because everything has been busted wide open. Your colleagues, coworkers, customers are now far more amenable to change because, well, we've had to change in a very short period of time. And the way in which we work is far more flexible than it used to be. So now is an ideal time to be asking ourselves some important questions. What sort of skills and talents do we need to foster within ourselves and the people we work with? And which talents and skills are no longer fit for purpose? How do we be successful in a world of constant change? If we're going to be successful, how do we prepare not just for the known unknowns, but the unknown unknowns too? Well, a few years ago, the military, US Navy, had to ask themselves this exact question: how to deal with the unexpected. They looked at their operating environment and they realized military technology had accelerated and the geopolitical center of the world had shifted east. They were facing a whole new different set of problems, threats, and opportunities compared to a generation ago. They fundamentally realized, though, the worst thing they could do was to stay the same and maintain the status quo. So they built a new class of ship. So this is the USS Gabriel Giffords. It's amazing because it's modular. Its insides can be changed out so it can set sail as a submarine hunter, a minesweeper, or a surface combatant. The most futuristic aspect, though, is the crew. Only 40 sailors, a fifth of the number on older ships the same size. The concept is known as minimal manning, and it overturns hundreds of years of tradition.
In one moment, a sailor might be pulling the lines, and the next, they're cooking Granny's favourite penne in the mess. A couple of hours later, they might be up on the bridge learning how to navigate. See, instead of being specialised, the sailors are a lot like the ship itself, modular, a Jill or a Jack of many trades, as opposed to being a master of just one.
Now, not everyone can handle this type of rapid task switching, so the US Navy and other branches of the military have changed the recruiting process. They look for people who can flexibly shift, move well in fluid environments. And it turns out, in the terms of the military, the right person is often a matter of life and death. And that right person is someone who can do many things quite well, rather than one thing very well.
Now, this flexibility, this skill that human beings have to adapt to the unexpected, is the most crucial talent for any organisation in the world. But don't worry, because we have good news. Human beings have an extraordinary ability to adapt because adaptability is intrinsic. We are wired for it.
You want some proof? I know many of you are digital. Take your left and right hand, put it in front of your face, turn it around. Oh, you got a bit of jazz hands going on. How about some sparkle fingers? If you got some kids, a bit of mashed potato. If you're happy and you know it,
we know you all did it because your hands are a work of art. 27 bones, 29 joints, 123 known named ligaments. And don't forget those big and beautiful opposable thumbs.
Take a moment to be in awe of your own machinery. At one extreme, you've got the strength of a rock climber. A single finger can hold up your entire body weight. On the other, you have the skills of an origami grandmaster, capable of making the most delicate of folds. These are complex tools, evolved over millions of years, and one of the most beautiful examples of engineering in nature.
What really sets the hand apart, though, is what guides it. The brain. Our hands and our brain have evolved together, creating something that is way better than artificial intelligence.
Evolutionary intelligence. You see, unlike machines and robots, our machinery, our brains, aren't fully pre-programmed, but instead shape themselves by interacting with an infinitely complex world. You are a different person than you were last year, last month, last week, because the gargantuan tapestry of your brain has woven itself into something new.
Our brain's remodeling ability is a lifelong gift, enabling us room to shift or to compensate for existing weaknesses. You want proof? Human beings have survived and flourished in an exceptionally wide range of places, from the African savanna to the Antarctica to the outback and all the way to outer space.
It's our evolutionary intelligence, our adaptability that allows us to think outside of the box, outside of the workplace, outside of the sphere, even outside of the stratosphere.
Tane, we can't deny that machines are pretty awesome. I mean, we can build algorithms that can process through millions of transactions in minutes.
And in cancer research, we can have algorithms that look at scans of human tissue and pick up tiny cancerous growths that elude even the world's best radiologists. We can even create robots that can perform parkour. Do synchronized backflips. One more time, please. Or we can create robots that can outperform us on the dance floor. Especially me on a Saturday night.
I can verify that one, definitely.
Fair enough. But imagine being able to do a four-legged shuffle.
Or we can create machines that can manipulate a Rubik's Cube and make it look uncannily human. Or we can create machines that can even solve that cube at superhuman speeds.
Solving in 3, 2, 1.
Oh, yeah. That is a world record, 0.38 seconds. Oh, yeah. But these machines, keep in mind, as cool as they are, they're highly specialized. They can only do one thing very well. These robots are never going to write a love letter to your partner or create a beautiful meal with what's left in the lockdown pantry. And sure, they can send texts, but do they send them to the wrong person? So sorry, Grandma.
Trust you to send that text. Robotics researchers actually have a name for this. It's called Moravec's paradox. And this is the idea that machines and humans have opposite strengths and weaknesses. See, we humans, we like to think that it's our logic and reasoning that makes us special. But that's easy for computers. It's what AI and machine learning is all about. Classifying things, finding hidden patterns, and optimizing pretty much everything.
You want to know where human beings really shine? It's when the rules get broken. We have to make conceptual leaps by linking two previously unrelated concepts. This is at the core of creativity, innovation, and adaptability. It's taking the new, making it familiar, and taking the familiar and casting it into new light. And when we do that, that's when we get progress. That's when we get the major breakthroughs.
So now we're going to showcase for you some of that human ingenuity. It's important to remember that to be dynamic, you don't necessarily have to create something new or even expensive. Sometimes it's about reorganizing what's right in front of you and making it fit for a new purpose. But before I can showcase this for you, we're going to need to get a little bit rock and roll.
This is for the metalheads out there.
The band's name is Ode to Vold, and they held the world's first socially distanced concert for an entire hotel during the first wave of lockdowns in Europe. Now, they knew that they couldn't hold a traditional concert because of social distancing, so instead they encouraged their fans to book hotel rooms instead of purchasing tickets. Welcome to the world of vertical concerts, where your drinks are delivered to your door and you get to crash out in the hotel room after the gig.
I mean, what could have possibly have gone wrong?
I can't even imagine, but it is nonetheless clearly better than a normal concert. And as it turns out, everybody agreed. The concert was so successful that a series of events were locked in, creating an entirely new revenue stream for the stranded band and also for the empty hotel. Clearly, rocking and rolling with the punches.
So speaking of progress, we've already shown you the benefit of modular ships, but this same process allowed millions of people to get vaccinated way before anyone expected. Now, vaccines generally take decades not only to develop, but also to distribute. But Moderna turned it around in less than a year, not only to develop, but distribute millions of vaccines to people all across the planet. So how did this happen? Well, this is one of their facilities built by a company called Lonza, nestled in the Swiss Alps. 5 years ago, Lonza invested in a new way of pharma manufacturing. Instead of building a facility to create a specific drug or vaccine or molecule, they built shells of buildings instead that could be adapted and set up quickly for different purposes. Much like the USS Gabriel Giffords, a modular facility that could be adapted and changed depending on the task at hand.
Now, this was a completely new way of making medicine. See, Big Pharma had always built facilities for one type of drug or vaccine, but you couldn't easily convert them for a different type of molecule.
Yeah, Lonza saw, though, that the pace of change was accelerating, drugs were becoming more diverse, and we were facing more extreme threats. They took an expensive gamble that paid off handsomely, not only for them, but for the entire world.
Now, remember that big breakthroughs don't always have to involve big military budgets or advanced medical science or even fancy algorithms. Sometimes they start with what's right in front of you, using even the simplest of materials. And that is exactly what Rhea Shah did. She's a designer from Mumbai in India. Now, when the pandemic struck, like so many of us, she wanted to help, but she didn't know where to start. So she looked close to home. Now, her family runs a paper factory, which doesn't really seem like it would be that helpful in the wake of a global pandemic. But she knew that the hospitals needed beds, and that was when inspiration struck. She combined two previously unrelated ideas and brought them together: hospital beds and paper.
And the outcome? A cardboard bed fit for the pandemic. It was so strong that you could jump on it, and it had a plastic coating so it could be sanitized. The best bit is it only cost $13 to produce, a fraction of the normal price. And so far, her and her family have shipped over 350,000 beds to hospitals all over India. One person, two unrelated ideas, super simple technology, hundreds of thousands of lives changed.
Okay, Tane, it is time for a quiz. What do the US Navy sailors, the European rock stars, the scientists at Moderna, and our cardboard crusader have in common?
Well, it wasn't their qualifications, their expertise, how smart they were, their IQ, intelligence quotient. Because we all know smart people, but we also know that the smart people aren't always the ones who come up with the major breakthroughs.
And it wasn't their EQ, the emotional quotient, the soft skills, the ability to communicate or empathize either.
While those two quotients are obviously super important, what they all had in common was their AQ, their adaptability quotient. Now, all three of these quotients are somewhat complementary. Take, for example, applying for a job. It's your qualifications, your expertise, your intelligence that lands you an interview, gets your resume at the top of the pile. It's your EQ that allows you to smooze the interviewer, laugh at their terrible jokes, and land the job, but ultimately build strong relationships with your clients, customers, and coworkers. But it's AQ that determines success over time. It's AQ that allows you to pivot when 30% of your daily tasks are taken over by an algorithm or a machine. The winners are those who use their IQ to identify talents and skills that the robots will never replace. So AQ is that ability to identify what is relevant, unlearn the obsolete knowledge, and make a conscious effort to change. And that is why Harvard Business Review calls it the new competitive advantage.
What we really want to emphasize here is that your adaptability has nothing to do with your age, your experience, or even your tolerance for risk. It's not about resilience or bounce back ability. It's all about your attitude. And in that sense, it's a lot like physical fitness, in that if you show up for it, if you work hard at it, if you train for it, you actually get better at it in the process.
It's an opportunity to embrace a lifelong learning process that delivers a better version of ourselves. So, you might be asking yourself, if this is the new competitive advantage, why is it often so absent in the workplace?
You probably know why. Picture this with me. You set out with your pursuit in mind, and at that early stage in the game, you're willing to make mistakes or to receive guidance. You're probably learning by experimenting, and there are many pathways in which you could choose. And then, somewhere in the middle of that process, you begin to hone it in, streamline things, perfect things. You're getting good at this. You're probably saving time and you're more productive as well. And then somewhere further down the road, you find yourself saying that terrible phrase. This is just how we do things around here because this is the status quo.
And once you've heard yourself say that terrible phrase, you've lost perspective. Because if we keep driving along the same paths and doing things in the old ways, we carve ruts in which we get stuck.
And in that rut, we have run into a paradox. Because the more you think you know about a subject, the more you close your mind to further learning. As the Zen monk Shunryu Suzuki says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the experts, there are few.
All right, let's switch gears here and give you some takeaways to improve your personal IQ. Our first tip is what we call embracing the amateur mindset. Now, the term amateur is usually used as a bit of an insult. You're a bloody amateur. But the word amateur actually comes from the Latin word to love. It describes those who adore an endeavor. Amateurs don't do stuff because they're part of a professional development package. They do it because they feel compelled. They think it'd be interesting to have a go. They dive in, improvise, imitate, and figure out the rules as they go along. They find the important rules by breaking them. They make the unimportant ones obsolete by never even realizing they existed in the first place.
Another approach that you can use to improve your adaptability is something that we call strong opinions lightly held. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, For many of us, we might struggle in letting go of our ideas or in having our ideas challenged. And the reason for that is because it feels personal and that can feel really uncomfortable.
And if you're anything like us, getting stuff wrong is not an experience that we'd like to feel. But it's not about getting things wrong because everyone gets things wrong occasionally. I happen to be exceptionally good at it. The problem is being wrong without realizing it, because that feels exactly like being right. Now, adaptable people get around this by admitting that there's a chance, however small, that they might be wrong. So when new ideas and new ways of thinking come along, they can more easily and gracefully change their mind.
So, Tane, you're a scientist. So, isn't this kind of how you do it in science?
Yeah, you have to be vigilantly aware of your own mistakes. It's actually part of the process. The scientific method and mindset is amazing because it allows for correction. It constantly evolves. Given just a single piece of contrary evidence, it insists we rethink everything that we once knew. And that's why science is awesome. It changes, those changes accrue, altering our world irrevocably.
So, tell me, can you think like a scientist? Can you, in one hand, hold a space to be the knowledgeable expert, while at the same time, in the other hand, be open to correction, to feedback, to new information and new evidence that invites you to rethink everything you thought you knew? With this powerful attitude, we are empowered to leverage what we do know alongside receiving the tools, developing the tools in order to be able to adapt when new information, new trends, or people change around us. And it also allows us to show our colleagues and our team that our opinions have room to evolve. And when we do this, we create a safe space that really builds trust for other people to share their ideas, to change their mind, and to also embrace this way of thinking. Now, while on the subject of thinking, I imagine that some of you out there may be grappling with the very daunting task of pulling down the reliable walls in your own mind. You might be thinking about what it means to intentionally make mistakes, to radically change your mind, or to even adopt a beginner's mindset. And if you are thinking about that, you could be feeling a little bit vulnerable right now.
It certainly feels vulnerable when I'm in that state.
Yeah. Well, that's okay, Tane, because if you're seeking out safety in this game of change, you can always phone a friend. You can outsource this process. And that is exactly what we do at Future Crunch. As a collective think tank of unlike minds, we can source our answers from anyone, including a scientist like Tane, an engineer, a musician, an artist, or even a poet.
We even have a political economist on the payroll. Pretty boring, don't tell anyone. But the point is, in all of our communities around the world, we're surrounded by adaptive people, disruptive thinkers. And I don't know about you, but some look a little more disruptive than others.
And if it's disruption that you're looking for, then look to the people who know less about a subject than you do, because they also know less about your perceived limitations. And that way you also rely less on your own solo and siloed thoughts to problem solve. And instead you open yourself up to a platter of solutions.
If you ask an engineer to solve a problem, let's say breaking down a wall, the answer is going to look a certain way.
And if you ask an artist, the solution will look different again.
But if you're part of a team full of people with diverse experiences, diverse backgrounds, with diverse beliefs, diverse genders, a team of curious and innovative minds who've been empowered to make suggestions and mistakes, then you will have the power of all of their solutions at your fingertips all of the time. And that is why we know collaboration always trumps genius. Because if we want to reach new heights, if we want to overcome our biggest challenges, if we want to prepare for a safe and prosperous future, We need each other. We need each other to be adaptable.
Because life happens in its ups and downs, and through it all, we do what we do best. We adapt, gaining new survival skills and expanding our horizons, having the strength to overcome our greatest challenges and the empathy to walk in the shoes of a stranger. We acknowledge just how lucky we are to be here, to experience this life in all of its nuances, its trials and triumphs, its elations and frustrations, its opportunities and challenges, and above all, in its beauty.
Because none of us know what's coming next, but what we do know is we have the ability to face it, to transform it into something that is not only benefit to people, but our planet. This is a great opportunity to grow yourself, your communities, your organization, and perhaps along the way even learn to love both the science and the magic of change. Now, it doesn't matter where we start. Embracing the amateur mindset, allowing your opinions room to evolve, those strong opinions lightly held, or just remembering you are remarkable. You're built for this. We're never too old, we're never too young to start a new adventure and to try one new thing.
We have it in us to be stronger, to be smarter, and to be kinder. So why not do it better each time round?
Thank you so much for your time. We're going to hand it over to Mr. Starr.
Rebecca and Tane, thank you for joining us today and for that incredible presentation. Please do come and join me on the couch for a chat now. And welcome to all of you joining us online today. My name is Gary Starr and I'm the Executive General Manager for Customer and Commercial here at Australia Post, and welcome to the latest in our webinar series. Now, we've hosted a few of these webinars over the past few years, but I'm so pleased to be doing this in person for the first time. This is actually the first one. We started them during COVID and they've all been virtual, so I've never been with the others in the room, so it's great to have you here. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Now, for those online, you can see the widgets on the screen, and I hope you've worked out by now you can make the screen bigger or smaller. But there's also a Q&A widget, and importantly, whilst I have lots of questions to ask, because there's just so much in that presentation, we want to make sure that you get a chance to ask questions as well. So please post them on the Q&A widget, and we'll answer as many of those as we can in the time that we have. And also, you will at the end have an opportunity to complete a survey, so I'll come back to that, but we do really appreciate your feedback, and each time we have one of these, we look to improve, so appreciate your feedback at the end. Now, I have so many questions for you guys, and we could take this in so many different directions, but I guess a key theme was adaptability and AQ, so perhaps I'll start with adaptability in business. Now, you talked about being a human skill, but I'm keen to explore how that translates to the business environment. You talked about just how critical adaptability is. And we've seen businesses that have adapted, and you mentioned a few, and those that haven't and have struggled through the last few years. I'm keen to understand what you'd sort of say is key to this, and is it just a natural propensity of the leaders and the way they behave and operate in those businesses, or is it more around organisational structure, I should say, like the examples you gave with the US Navy? And you know, what leads to the success of those businesses? Do you see any sort of common themes?
Definitely one that we sort of live by, diversity by design. Getting as many diverse viewpoints as you can, because that makes you far more adaptable. But the individual adaptability is the same thing, diverse opinions and strong opinions lightly held, your ability to change your mind. And you can scale that up to organizational structure. And it's getting teams of teams. I don't know if you've heard of Stan McChrystal. He's a US general, but he turned around the US military by getting all of the different entities together, 8 people. They could share a pizza, so no more than could share a pizza in a meeting. And they would do, basically you have operational intelligence and insights from a variety of different, from land, sea to sky, and also information from the ground. And so I think diversity of opinions and allowing people from, put it this way, I've learned more from poets and musicians than I have from scientists half the time. They can often tell the stories and bring it to life. I could talk to you about facts all day, but that doesn't get that beautiful magic, and it doesn't inspire people, so you need all types.
So we have a large audience out there, probably a few thousand people online today, and they range from government to large organisations to small. making that leap, it doesn't sound so easy sometimes, particularly for organisations that have been around a long time. Now, you spoke about the US Navy, obviously, typically, or historically, very hierarchical and command and control. That is a pretty big change in terms of the way they operate. So any tips, how do you sort of start this journey where you're used to being in a pretty hierarchical or environment where there are rules and starting to have these more team of teams or diverse conversations?
Yeah, well, we were talking about it earlier, Bex and I, like Lego, how you can outsource this, right? You can outsource information by talking to the crowd. And so they got engineers and they made it open source, all the Lego kits, and they asked people to give them designs. So it doesn't have to be necessarily internal, you can get it externally. And so that's how they've created the vast array of cool Lego kits from Ninjago to Machu Picchu. And I think, yeah, looking outside the box and your boundaries that you perceive is a very important way to do it. But yeah, different ways of thinking.
Yeah, and I think as much as within an organisation we can focus on what's going on around us, and most notably that is emerging technology, amongst other things. Those things are going to continue to change. So what we're dealing with today will be another thing in 5 years and another thing in 10 years. So counterintuitively, the focus is now coming back to, well, what does it mean to be human? So whilst, yes, it might be a little bit challenging right now to lean towards adaptability, as we said in our presentation, this is going to be the most crucial talent for any organisation in the world, not only today, but as the technology continues to change, we are going to have to continue to hone in, perfect and streamline our ability to adapt. So the question is not so much, is it hard to adapt? I believe that we should be focusing on, well, how do we master this skill more quickly, because it's going to become the most important skill we will need as we move into this new era and technology continues to move at the rate of change we've already witnessed.
Yeah, I heard a great quote. If you don't like change, you will like being obsolete even less.
Well, as at Australia Post, we're facing into that now. I mean, we talk about our 200-year history, but the pace of change has never been as great. And as you said in your presentation, the last 2 years have been unprecedented. So we're facing to so many things changing all at the same time. Every industry, every aspect of every industry. So how we deal with that and look forward and take our 200-year history and take the best of what we have, but adapt to the future and anticipate 5 or 10 years out what the world may look like is just so important.
Absolutely, yeah. It's almost at that organisational level, holding a space to be the knowledgeable expert, to honour all of the tools and the experience you have, whilst at the same time leaning into the unknown and essentially adopting that amateur mindset at a collective level in order to be able to lean into innovation and the gems that you discover out there on the fringe.
I think that one of the things that resonated for me that you spoke about was diverse teams, and how when we're bringing teams from across the organisation together, we'll get the questions that people won't ask because they're looking through a set of goggles. They're sort of limited because of what they've learned. As you said, they sort of know what they think they know, and they won't ask those out-of-the-box questions that then stimulate a great solution, something that we wouldn't have thought of otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm sure you see that a lot. So just speaking of collaboration, the last few years have been challenging. As I said, this is the first time I'm sitting in a room with my co-presenters, which is just a wonderful thing. But what have you seen in terms of making that work in a virtual or this hybrid world now going forward? Because you talked about Zoom, even the CEO of Zoom getting Zoom fatigue. So there is that balance between virtual and face-to-face. But how do you see this sort of hybrid world and collaboration working going forward?
It's about balance, like everything. I think having a digital detox or time when you're not in front of a screen is highly important. Like a lot of CEOs in Silicon Valley, they make sure that they manage their screen time very carefully. And also manage the information that comes in. We talk a lot about information diet. One of the most important things, we talk about, a healthy diet for getting people to, become healthy, eat your leafy greens and your vegetables and grains. But I think we should view information in the same way. And now it comes largely through screens, right? And so we really need to make sure that we have our wholesome food, because what comes in does come out. It has a physical effect on the way you feel. Negative news, clickbait, actually creates a physical response. gives cortisol, adrenaline. You actually become addicted to it. We're hardwired for the dramatic and the negative. So ask yourself, can you balance your information diet to something that nourishes you? Choose a narrative nosh that feeds you and makes you better, rather than brings you down or distracts you. And I think if there's ultimately anything we can do in a world where digital technology is a layer across every aspect of our society, fundamentally choose what digital detritus or food and nourishment that you're going to get from it, because I think we lose sight on it. It's beautiful to Netflix and chill, open that pint of ice cream and eat the whole thing. For me, it's a bag of chips, but just be conscious when you're doing it. You can have your down the YouTube rabbit holes, but just realize, when you're doing it, because I think far too often we're not conscious of the information that is being fed to us, and then that means it owns us and makes us unhealthy.
I actually worry about this with my kids, with this concept of confirmation bias, where they're using social media and it's serving up what they want to see, more of the same, more of what they want to see, and then it's the risk of tunnel vision, or just reinforcing that view over and over versus looking more broadly. And I encourage them to try to look more broadly. Otherwise that's a real concern.
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah.
And so one thing that we've done at Future Crunch is we went onto social media and followed people from every country, every different gender, every different religion, left, right, middle, and what you get, and you do comedians, politicians, transgender, all different people, and even people that you would dislike, and you follow like 5 to 10 people from each major continent, and then you get a totally different stream of information. It sort of really balances it. Doesn't mean you need to agree with it, but you're consciously aware of the breadth and the amazing knowledge. We stand on the shoulder of giants.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Now, you spoke about the Moderna example earlier, and it reminded me of a conversation very early in COVID with my brother, who's a professor of infectious diseases, and he was skeptical that we would see a vaccine anytime soon back then, and of course, history shows we have. So, and you talked about just the level of collaboration, but interesting to understand, what do you think led to that? I mean, there was an imperative, obviously, around the world to save lives, but have you seen that level of collaboration elsewhere? Because you had lots of amazing stories, but that ability to move so quickly on something that had historically taken so long.
Well, I mean, I guess necessity is the mother of invention, and this was saving millions of lives. I guess why I trusted the scientists in this way is they collaborated on a worldwide scale, but they also have peer review. So people are trying to literally break the mold, and they're trying to attack it, and you have to prove yourself, and basically guilty until proven innocent in science, right? And so they made it, and I would trust a group of scientists and experts that have gone together across the world, and it has fundamentally changed science, which is great, because my academic career was largely in science, and it's still like a business. People are very protective, but this kind of cracked the mold, and now people are sharing open source information. And I think that's the way, because we're all in this together. We're citizens of the world, and so we should work together. If you're on a sinking ship and you have a better plan for a new bucket and a new baler, why not share it? I think that's the way we need to change.
And I wonder how much of that will be sustained, how much muscle memory there'll be, in the scientific world post-COVID, because it is, in the end, there is competition and people building intellectual property. They all came together. I'd like to think that some of that will be embedded, the benefit of that collaboration will be seen and will prevail. What are your views on that?
The reason I've moved more into science communication and storytelling is because you need to make the facts sexy. You need to get people's attention. Because I think what happens, from climate change to better ways of doing stuff with science and better ways of treating people, what happens is you get stuck in old ways of thinking. So you actually need to excite and entice people to change. And that involves scientists, admin, janitors, cooks, everything, a whole team, to actually bring something to the forefront that is exciting, that people actually, I want to have a go. That's interesting. And I don't know, make the world better by making it a better story. Because the stories we tell ourselves fundamentally lead to the stories that we will create in the history books.
which is a beautiful segue to what I was about to say, which is that there are incredible humans out there in the world doing extraordinary things, and we can certainly attest to that at Future Crunch in that so much of what we do is seek out and share stories of human progress via our newsletter. I also, as the host of the DNA of Purpose podcast, I'm talking to people all the time who are really out there and have really shifted from a place of power over to a place of empowerment, and who are focusing on collaboration rather than competition. And when you immerse yourself in these stories, you do feel hopeful about the future. And much of our brand at Future Crunch, we have built upon something that we call intelligent optimism. And this is the idea that there are extraordinary things happening on the world. So let's, as a collective, focus on the solutions rather than getting bogged down in the problems. Because when we do that, we feel inspired to join the movement that is fundamentally making this world a better place. And I think for us, we are immersed in that. And so you can't help but be inspired about the creation of a more peaceful and more abundant planet.
Yeah, because keep in mind, cynicism is easy. You're never wrong or disappointed when stuff goes bad. To the contrary, if you describe the way a better future can be built and we draw the boundaries of what's possible, then that's the place I want to live in. And if everything does go wrong, if the end of the world, we come to the end of the world party, I know who I'll be hanging out with. I want to be hanging out with the people who are like, we gave it everything we had. Well, we didn't quite get there, but well done. I don't want to be sitting with my last waning hours with someone who's like, I told you so.
Totally.
Yes.
And I think it's important to clarify that we're not saying that there are not difficult things happening in the world.
Yeah.
There clearly are a lot of devastating, tragic things happening in the world. We're simply saying that it is a choice that we can each, as individuals, make with regards to where we focus in order to address how we want to create change for the planet and for people.
Well, I'd like to think in many of our customers, many of the people joining us today come from the e-commerce world. And one of the things I've found very positive about the e-commerce space in Australia is that they tend to share to grow e-commerce, together, that they're sharing ideas and working as part of an ecosystem. There is greater benefit, as much as they will compete day to day, but they are serving the greater good. So hopefully the storytelling that you're doing, and what you talk about is the way of the future, and we'll see more and more of that. I do have just one other question about, we're here in Australia and we look at examples around the world, and you talked about Moderna and US Navy. One that struck me is in Israel, people talk about startup nation and the idea of a country that's really punches above its weight in some ways, punches above its weight in terms of startups per capita and it generating new ideas and technology. Are there geographic differences, and where does Australia sit in your mind, and how do we go in terms of that adaptability and innovation and sort of punching above or below our weight? What are your views?
Well, I think it's a yes and. Like Australia punches way below its weight in many ways, but way above its weight in other ways. Like we tend to hear politicians talk about renewable energy and being faulty, but citizens have used their wallet to actually put more solar panels on residential households than anywhere in the world. South Australia went completely 100% renewable. They had 120% capacity in April this year, and they gave 20% to Victoria. Thank you very much. My electricity price dropped. But Israel's great. They punch way above their weight, except in one thing. They have strong borders, and that stops collaboration. And I think that's one thing that they could do a bit better. But having said that, they have a government that helps seed these things as well, so a good support structure as well. But yeah, Australia is geographically isolated, and it has amazing resources, and we could do much better with what we have, like battery storage. We've got the biggest lithium deposits in the world. I mean, that's incredible. We've got heaps of innovation here as well. And I think like CSIRO, there's a bunch of innovation being pumped in and money from the government. And so I think we got it. We're even starting a space program recently. And so we've got it in us to be not so geographically isolated, but take innovations from the world and also create our own.
I heard an article this morning that in terms of applications for battery-based technology, that we have more than enough gigawatt application in terms of gigawatts to fuel the country, and if we can pick the ones that are the most effective, there's no question. So it sounds like from a sustainability perspective that there are some good things going for us. We've just got to continue to push hard on it.
Yeah, and it's now fundamentally, the hope that I have in the world is now it's becoming cheaper to save the world than it is to ruin it. So vote with your wallet.
Now, my last question before we go to the audience is just, now you're a scientist, so and you guys are clearly being a think tank.
She's a science geek as well.
A science geek as well.
I've become the official nerd herder in our team, actually.
So you're out there every day, and you've clearly got your antenna up and looking around. What about for the novice? How do we keep up with just the amount of change, keep ourselves informed? There are organisations out there that will be thinking, this is inspiring, but how do I take this away and just, I guess, listen to think tanks like you guys, like Future Crunch, but what else can we be doing? And we were just talking about sustainability, keeping up with information and being able to inform our organisations and continue to drive change there. What are your ideas around how to do that when you're not a scientist? You may not have the time or the wherewithal.
Well, I mean, not to plug our newsletter, but they're not ours, but they're highly curated spaces on the internet. The world's greatest information resource, we have it at our fingertips, so use it wisely. There's no right place to start, but do your research and don't listen to the clickbait, don't listen to the mainstream media. But I mean, that is a hard question, but if it's new and exciting and not negative and it's a solution rather than talking about a problem, that's where I would start.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And I think one thing that I've certainly learnt from the many interviews I've done about human purpose is that it starts with one thing, making courageous decisions, and within organisations building cultures of courageous decision makers. And I think when we're looking at some of these really big shifts with regards to sustainability, it's the courageous decisions that we make every single day that matter the most.
I'm laughing because the first question here, which I'll now go to the audience, is from Vanessa from TFOM, who says, and that this wasn't staged, how do we convince decision makers in an organisation, in brackets, who tend to be more conservative, that change and adaptability is the way forward? So you've sort of answered that. But
There we go. Thanks, Vanessa.
It's something we prepared earlier.
it sounds like it takes a bit of courage. It takes a bit of courage to do that. Okay, so Kirsty from ARTC, what advice do you have for leaders to motivate their team to think differently and step outside, that's the way we have always done it?
Well, I think leaders need to admit that they're wrong, and half the time they have no idea what they're doing because they're in it together. It's that creating the safe space to make mistakes and know that, like, we're facing the unknown. I mean, the pace of change is increasing. We've never dealt with this current environment. And so a bit of ambiguity, people need strong leaders and direction, but having said that, it can't be hardwired, and hard lines. I think that's what's lacking. Because people come in and say, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way, and I think that creates, it closes people off to better ways of thinking.
Right, okay. So a question from Margie, not sure from where, but how do you guys practice adaptability at Future Crunch?
I think through the...
And I was going to just, sorry, to add to that, sorry to interrupt, Tane, but how do you, one question I had, because I think people leaving will say, how do you measure that you're making, like how would you say, we think we're making progress here, and I can see we're on a journey and...
Look, I mean, I think my instinct in answering that question is to simply say lean in, but to provide a framework for that, I believe that adaptability exists in the space in between, again, being the knowledgeable expert and adopting that beginner's mindset, pushing yourself out into an area where you don't know the terrain, where it feels a little bit uncomfortable, where it feels vulnerable, because, we spoke about courage a moment ago. Well, courage and vulnerability are two sides of the one coin. So it's really important to remember that. So I'd say lean in, but I'd also really want to encourage people to feel excited by this. Because when you sit in that space between what you do know and what you don't know and what you can learn in the space that you don't know, that is when you feel alive. And that is when you feel purpose. And that is when you feel such an embodied level of engagement about why you do what you do. So get excited about adaptability.
And I always like to think about it, embrace the imposter syndrome. If you're feeling like an imposter surrounded by people who are better than you at different tasks and different things, you're in the right place, because then you're learning. And I think intelligent optimism is another lens that we look through. It's not naive, it's fact-based. Like, naive optimism is a kid who's waiting at Christmas time for Santa Claus to bring presents. Intelligent, courageous optimism is a girl who wants to build a treehouse, so she gets the wood, nails, hammer, and gets friends and builds it together. And that's intelligent, courageous, fact-based optimism.
Great. Well, some great answers there. And unfortunately, we're right up on, there are more questions, but we're up on time. Cool. So, and we've always tried to stick right to time with these webinars. So firstly, a big thank you to you, Rebecca and Tane, for the presentation today, for a lot of the thinking. I know I took a lot away, and I'm sure the audience did too. And to our audience, thank you for joining. Thank you for our questions. As always, please do fill in the survey, the second last digit, the second last widget, I should say. Please look out for the next webinar in our series. And in the meantime, stay safe and be kind. Thanks very much.